AutCraft is a server that I have been active on for a very long time. And if there's one universal truth in Minecraft, that would be that the longer you've been on the world, the messier the storage is. However, due to specific circumstances related to just this world, I had to adapt in very different ways than in most other worlds. This is the history of my storage systems, utility systems, and bedrooms on AutCraft. I definitely think the story mainly starts 2 years after 16, as I've had a lot more info around this time, and this was around the time when my methods started to diverge massively from other worlds. But I feel like it would be a crime to not include anything before this point. Due to my first base being on an old world which corrupted, I can only rely on extremely foggy memory. However, it was common for me at the time to have every utility in the same room, including crafting tables, furnaces, beds, and chests. And if I wanted to expand and add rooms, they usually had no functional purpose at all and were mainly decorative. This replica of my base that I have built relatively recently shows that all of the things are on the first floor. And keyword, it's a replica, so it's probably mostly true, although it's definitely not exact. And also the room on top was a shop. That was also something I separated. Something else to note about this time in specific is that the only other utilities other than crafting tables, furnaces, and chests and beds, I guess, were ender chests and brewing stands. Other things like stone cutters or cartography tables or looms have not came out yet. So in some regard, it was way simpler to kind of have all of your utility items together. When the world reset, I lived with my brother for a few months. We decided to organize ourselves by having a shared at the bottom and having our own ones at top. My room is this wall-walled one right here. In the shared room, there are a few chests that were either mostly looted or inaccessible because of a claiming bug. But you can also see that I was expanding inside of my room. I have no evidence of this, but I'm pretty sure that both of us hid a lot of stuff in our ender chests since there were some in spawn. Because just due to how many resources transferred from the old to new world, well, what was inside there and what was inside the claim chests, I have no idea. But from looking at the looted ones, it seems to be similar to a chest. Just random items everywhere. I do theorize that I did carry some iron between the two worlds, whether in the inventory or in the ender chests, as I went into more detail about this on my History of Valuables video. Something else that is kind of funny, and that's kind of unrelated, was that while I was writing this script, I went AFK inside of the wall room, and a creeper somehow managed to sneak up on me, blew up the entire thing, and then I drowned. Yeah, I had to rebuild the entire thing, unfortunately. When I moved into my current base in 2016, a few months after, I did a similar strategy as to the old 2014 and 2015 base. There were going to be 3 sections with 2 ones on the first floor and a long one on the second. Like the old base, the top floor was reserved for a shop, but I wanted to try something new with the lower 2 rooms. I was going to separate my bedroom with the rest of my stuff. The front room had all of my chests, furnaces, and crafting tables. There was no real organization-based system and the chests were scattered, so it would turn out to be a mini chest monster. And the room in the back was a very large bedroom. Now this is actually kind of different because I didn't mention this, although the method of just kind of having everything in one room was very common at that time. So it was kind of weird having a different room for bed compared to a crafting table compared to, storage. Now, before I was looking through old videos, I thought that the chests were in the same room as the bed, and the front room was only for crafting tables and furnaces. But this is a perfect example as to how memory is pretty inaccurate at some times, and everything that I say I can only rely off of memory for, especially at very long time scales, should be taken as a grain of salt. Once I had my main base done, I started to expand out. This is something I never did before, as my bases were hyper connected. This is when I started building all of the small satellite buildings you see around the surface of my base, like a miniature city. Heck, the main building in the current state is the old one and many satellite builds combined together. Yet these satellite buildings function very similarly to how the different rooms worked in old bases, with some of them being for decorations and others being used for either farms or shops. Now, the storage situation will stabilize for the next couple of years. I would gather resources, build onto my base, and put the rest into my chest. Even though the amount of storage I had, if in modern times, would be nothing and would be outgrown in a few weeks maximum, due to there being less items and therefore the inventory problem being less severe at the time, and also builds being a lot smaller, the amount of storage I had was actually pretty sufficient. I was also able to get some more expensive utilities, such as ender chests and brewing stands. As the next couple of years went by, new updates rolled in and my storage started to fill up more and more. I would eventually outgrow the chests in the utility room, so I started expanding into my bedroom. I was able to lay them out orderly and keep a nice design, at least for now. It wasn't only the chests which were creeping into my bedroom. Crafting tables and furnaces were also starting to seep in. Not only that, but I wanted a convenient water source, which is really funny. In fact, I literally live on top of an ocean. But I wanted it to be like a sort of water fountain sort of thing, and I could not find any place to put it in the utility room, so it went inside my bedroom. It seemed like as every year went by, my old habits seemed to return more and more, and the two rooms would turn into one. Related to that, every day it seemed like more and more that I would need to spam chests. I tried to organize, no luck. Tried to put as many chests as possible, excluding the second story, also no luck. But like a divine bolt, one critical update changed everything. 1.11. This was the update that allowed you to use rockets to propel elytras. That was obviously not important to me at the time due to sheer brokenness, but something kind of related that was much more important was that they added shulker boxes. Now you might be thinking that I'd run into the same issue, but a few people would leave them filled with certain material in the community chest and be too lazy to empty them, so I would just make use of them and either empty the boxes or just use the contents inside, and bam, I have shulker boxes. Although these were absolutely amazing because not only does it not have the problem that chests used to have where you couldn't place them next to each other, you can also place them on walls, you can place them randomly on the floor and you can pick them all up, and you can also place them in chests. It was like a dream come true, basically. And if I spammed them anywhere, I could always clean them up at some point. And if you thought I'd be responsible and put even a single one inside of the chest, no, you poor soul. It's 2023 now. I have said this in every single video, but from 2019 to 2020, I took a long break. These were my high school years, and there were many factors that came into play, such as an increased workload and less but higher quality content, but probably the biggest reason was that I was mainly focused on other SMPs throughout the period. The storage situation stayed roughly the same, despite me intentionally pushing mining and collecting lots of other resources. Just more and more shulker boxes littered around the base in the new working stations. I have floated the idea of a new storage system, but there were a lot of problems. However, all of these problems would revolve around one core issue. It would be nowhere near the old one. And this was even worse because I built my entire base to stay in that specific area for most of the time playing. And this would not change when I put a frame around the entire thing. The dock, right nearby. Horses, not super close, but also pretty close. The evil island, also right nearby. Even though it was not built at the current moment, it would be built soon and it would exacerbate the problem. In the meantime, things were getting worse. For an unknown reason, I switched away from shulker boxes and back from chests. And they started creeping upstairs, and they were expanding rapidly. The shop was long gone, and it was vacant for many years with its original purpose after the shop being a YouTuber. Actually, now that I said that, that's probably the reason why. But despite the massive breadth of the rooms, the chest monster expanded so rapidly that it filled up within only a couple of months. Back to shulker boxes, I guess. This was actually a massive wake-up call, though. This was around the time that 2024 started, and this made me reconsider everything. Before, I was thinking about a larger, more permanent system, but it was not a top priority. Now it is a top priority. It needs to be addressed ASAP. In that sense, before it was bad, now it's really bad. I immediately started to patrol underneath my base. I was looking in particular at the first floor underground and near the old storage system. I went through every tunnel and every room, marking the quartz. It was looking really bad. It was so bad that connecting it directly to the evil island was not out of the question, despite it being supposed to be isolated. And this is when I realized that the area with land was a complete dud. It was so jam-packed that it would be hard even to fit a small room, let alone an entire new storage system. I then went in the area underwater. There was a very short area sandwiched between the metro system, the basement of the main build, the canal, and the surface, directly north of where all of the land is. It was pretty long and wide, being around 19 by 24 blocks. The problem was that might be enough, but also might not be. Not to mention that it was an extremely weird shape. Not to mention it was only 5 blocks tall. Yeah, 5. A design would be almost impossible, and the amount of storage per category was extremely limited, so I looked elsewhere. But it soon became apparent to me that that was the only viable option. I then re-evaluated the area. The weird shape could be used to build a super smelter and a bedroom, and I could probably be able to settle, probably not forever, but for a very long time if I'm extremely smart as I lay out the chest. Now this was actually a massive issue that took me a very long time to figure out. There was, the height problem of course, but it also was like, I sort of realized, kind of small, and there definitely needed to be like multiple categories in each chest row. And it also was a problem because I needed to figure out how to maximize the amount of chests I could fit in there. There was also obviously the height problem. Slab for the floor were a necessity, but that would still make it 4 blocks tall, which could work, but it'll be hard. However, like I said, the 5 blocks I was talking about was only like the shortest point, as it was extremely variable and there are a couple areas which went way deeper, with one of those eventually becoming my new bedroom. I would eventually come up with a solution to the chest problem, and I am not exaggerating when I say this. This has to have been the weirdest layout for a storage system I've ever had, and I don't think I'm gonna ever see anything even close to this. Basically, it was a square room with chests on one of the 4 walls, but with a row of chests about 2/3 of the way out parallel to that row, directly in the middle of the room. And this row would have 2 chests facing on each side. So essentially there were 3 rows of chests, 2 ended up facing into a sort of like hallway sort of configuration, while one just straight up faced away from the entire thing. Now, part of the reason why there was that 3rd row as well was to make it look from outside from the north. But also, like I said, part of it was for efficiency purposes as well. The weird setup came with a few consequences, however. First, it would be much less convenient to access the chests facing away from the base than the other 2. And this would especially be the case with the ones far away from the super smelter and bedroom. Second, where would things like crafting tables be? Chests and furnaces needed the most room, but crafting tables were still needed, obviously, and the same thing goes with the other new workbenches. So, for the first problem, I wanted to have the chests I would access the least, the furthest away from either the main hallway or the super smelter. Now, I probably spent the most time planning this out of any other project on the server, maybe except for the Evil Eye. I've tried many different combinations before settling you saw today. I really wanted to get this right, and I did. In fact, I was so on point that I did not even need to switch any categories between chests. And with the second problem, I was able to fit these small modules with a crafting table, ender chest, and a shulker box on top with various things that didn't really fit in the storage system, such as buckets, shears, and flint and steel, alongside a disposal sign, which is a custom plugin. It's self-explanatory. I also found a couple places to fit the rest of the workbenches around the room. That is, except for stonecutters. I eventually put them in the corners of the side facing the ocean. And with the super smelter, I was only able to fit one that used 4 furnaces at once. But despite that, that was still a massive upgrade from using automatic double ones, and it might have also been a good thing due to the hopper limit. It was also around this time that I added a connection to the basement, as it was originally supposed to only have one that went to the metro system and one that I will get to a bit later. The functional part of the new living space is done, and it was time for my humble abode. It wouldn't be connected directly to the storage room, but it would still be very close. This is mainly due to the weird shape of this entire area, like I said. The bedroom will be directly underneath the storage system, like literally directly underneath, in a tiny pocket that the metro system did not occupy. This will be connected with the hallway that went outward to connect with some other stuff on the northern end of the base, and you basically have to just wiggle downstairs and just U-turn and go through a tiny passage to end up there. Now this is the shape of my new bedroom, although as you can see it was a very awkward shape, but it wasn't anywhere near as bad as I thought it would be at first, as I managed to surprisingly make it look pretty good. Even though it's a bit long and thin, the shape just works, you know? A few utilities that weren't able to fit in the storage room were also tucked in, with the main ones being in an infinite water source like with the old bedroom. It's behind the crafting table module right here, by the way. A blast furnace setup, a jukebox, regular furnaces tucked behind the bed, and campfires, alongside another crafting module. We also get a really nice view of the side of the ocean, which is nice as well. It would be really cool if we had the 1.13 generation with the kelp and all of that, but it almost is cooler to some extent with how empty the ocean is. I don't know, it's just weird, but cool. And this setup has lasted me up to today, over 2 years later. I was able to keep order and organized as well. Some of those chests are close to full, but shulker boxes can help. I actually did not expect this to happen when I was building it. I thought that it would last 2 years maximum. And this brings me to something I do not talk about much in these videos, and that is future planning. I actually have put some thought into how it would evolve in the future, and you can see that if you walk through the basement to the other side, across the monstrosity enchanting table and door, there is this tiny entrance which leads to this massive room. It is 3 stories high, almost exactly in the center of the base, and is over a third of the entire length in both directions. It is so large, in fact, that it borders both the metro and the dock, with it taking up a good portion of both the border and the area underneath of the latter, and also links up to literally the other side of the base. Also, you might notice this small section right here. This is going to be my future bedroom, and it will also have an access point to the surface soon. And if you're wondering how far this is on land, well, it's right here. Almost on the other side of the main building, way past the halfway point west-eastward of the base, and further away than where the horse stable is. This area was chosen in specific because this is the last point where part of it, at least, is going to be only one floor underneath the surface, and is also close to the main stretch that I've been referring to in the video beforehand. Not much has been planned about this area, but it's going to be magnitudes bigger than the previous system, and with both original and bulk storage. It will also probably utilize new storage items more, such as bundles and shelves. And believe it or not, this might not even be the last storage system. I have floated ideas of eventually expanding upward alongside downward. Not only that, but at the top of how many layers I eventually want, there would be a mega base. And I mean like the new kind of mega base, almost merging the old and new styles together. Now this is still extremely speculative, and this will not happen until many more years in the future. Like, there are next to no plans about this currently. There isn't even a trace of me trying to expand the frame upward, but in theory, this base will come with, inside of the mega base build will, in theory, basically be all of the storage and furnaces. I don't know how many I'll have, but, and the rest of the utilities would be inside a massive room. How it would work, I do not know. I have not thought about this at all, and this is something that, like I said, wouldn't even remotely start until many years in the future. And this is the complete history of storage and utilities on my Minecraft Forever world. This journey has definitely made me appreciate how much Minecraft has changed over the years and how much simpler it used to be. The storage problems that are well known today have only been a relatively recent thing, and even so, if you were young and inexperienced, you would probably not notice it. But now there are just so many new biomes and so many new items and foliage, which is definitely good for the game. It makes the game look a lot better. It makes it a lot more fun. But a consequence of all of this is that it has made inventory problems way worse. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to my channel, dislike the video if you dislike, comment down below, and I'll see you guys all in the next video. Peace out!